4 years ago, Terrance was stuck in a one-bedroom apartment during COVID, dreaming about owning real estate. Today, he's under contract for his seventh rental property across 4 different markets.
Would I have dragged my feet if COVID didn't happen? Probably, but COVID really accelerated it for me.
While he was investing in New Jersey, Ohio, and Indiana, he learned where he should have focused his attention.
I spent a lot of time analyzing the market, analyzing properties, running the numbers. I should have spent an equal amount of time vetting property management and vetting the people who are going to essentially be your boots on the ground.
In this episode, Terrance shares exactly how he scaled to 7 properties in just 4 years.
I had $100,000 and I knew that I had 50 grand essentially for each. Really kind of work backward from the down payment. And if that works in an area that I want to invest in.
If today's high prices and interest rates have you wondering if you can still buy rental properties, Terrance's journey proves you can. All right, Terrance, I can't wait to dig into your story. I want to talk about how you've gotten to the point where you have these 6 units. You started about 4 years ago, and you're doing a lot of these out of state. So I want to get into all the details of that. But what I'm really curious about is there's always like a moment or maybe a transition when you actually decided, I actually want to start buying properties. And so I'm curious for you, like was it a book? Was it a moment? Was it a conversation that kind of got you into this journey?
Yeah, it definitely was a book. I mean, similar to a lot of other folks, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, but loved it. But I think really what it was in COVID, I worked in Philadelphia and I was not in the office. So I was in a very small, working from home, little 1-bedroom apartment with my now wife. And the walls were kind of closing in on me a little bit. And I didn't own anything at that time. And we had obviously talked about we're getting married. So, the next step for us was to try to buy a house and do that, go down that road. And I had always been interested in owning real estate outside of even just a primary. So, would I have dragged my feet if COVID didn't happen? Probably. I probably would have got analysis paralysis, wouldn't have jumped in, but COVID really kind of accelerated it for me. And once we bought our primary, I was like, all right, I'm comfortable with the mortgage process now. I understand conversations with the lender. Let's try to do this on the investment side.
So you're curious about it, you're interested in it, and did you have at the time when you first started, did you have any kind of big picture idea of like, this is the kind of portfolio I'm gonna put together, or was it just like, I just wanna buy one property and see how it goes?
Exactly the second part of what you said. I said to myself, let's just buy one. I'm going to manage it myself. I was honest with myself. I knew I was going to make mistakes, and I did, and I did, which were
We all
good.
do.
Yeah,
We all do.
which was good. Which was good to learn from. But at the time, it was I have a home that I'm going to live in, and hopefully start a family, and let me just buy one investment property to manage. That was the goal.
Got it. All right, let's set the stage for that. So you said you work in the financial services industry. You're in Philly is where your job is, and you live in South Jersey. So let's kind of set the stage for you. Where did you start looking for a property? What were you looking for at that point for your first deal?
So our first deal, actually, interestingly enough, is only 15 minutes away from where we currently live, and I leaned heavily on my agent at the time because I really didn't even know what I was looking for. And I knew he was a very experienced real estate agent, great to work with. And I knew that he did, first time home buyers, but I knew he also worked with investors. So he was someone I kind of tapped and said, what should I be looking for? What's good, what's bad, what areas? Because at that time I didn't even really know South Jersey that well. My wife and I were trying to do research based off of school systems and, also a lot of where some of our friends live. We wanted to be kind of in proximity of where they live. That was like our criteria. So, he was the person who really kind of helped me and send me a couple properties and say, hey, if I were looking right now, this is what I would look at. This is why. So he was really kind of instrumental in helping me, kind of get the first one going.
Do you remember what your financing budget was? Like how much cash you had set aside, and then did you have any like financial numbers you were looking at for that first deal?
I did. So for the first one, I knew that and again, this is back in, 2021. So things were a lot different. And I knew that after we had just bought our primary, I knew that we had, the budget really was, it couldn't be over $250,000 to go the conventional route. I knew I had to put 25% down. And that was really kind of like my all in top number. And he helped me work down from that. And our first property he was able to actually, it was listed for 235. We were actually able to get it for 215, which was great. And it was a 2 unit.
Got it. Yeah, that's what I think is curious. A lot of people have to figure out, like, what price range can I buy in? And it sounds like you worked backwards from your down payment. It's like,
Exactly.
all right, if I have 50 grand and I have to put 20% down or so, that kinda limits you to, all right, I gotta buy something in the 250, 200,000 range to have a little bit extra cash. So you worked it backwards. Your agent, who's a key team member, helped you find a property. It was also
Mhm.
proximate to you, to where you live. So you bought something in South Jersey. Were there any surprises? Like, how did that first deal go for you overall when you're looking back on it?
Looking back on it, I it's really become kind of a cornerstone of our portfolio, just because, I can fully admit, definitely got a little lucky with it being in 2021. The interest rate's below 4%. We were able to, rents, I think when we got it, were total 2,600. Today they're 3,400. So, it's definitely, and that was something that at the time I did not foresee and I did not know. So there was a lot of bumps in the road in the beginning. I mean, when we first bought it, it was occupied, but the tenants on one side immediately moved out. So then I had to learn the kind of screening and vetting tenant process. Did not do well with that. It's when you're a rookie, you're just so, and I didn't want any vacancy, so I didn't have any screening procedures. I didn't have any guidelines. I was like, I just want a tenant. I just, a
Yeah.
tenant is better than no tenant. So that mistakes were made there, and I didn't have any kind of, I was friendly. I was kind of the I'm always here owner, and there wasn't a line between landlord and tenant. I was getting texts and calls about disputes that the tenants were having with each other. Like I was like another friend. Yeah, so it was just not a good situation that I'd kind of put myself in. And once these things started happening, I started realizing, like, okay, this is definitely not the best way to go about managing this. And it needs to be there needs to be some pretty big changes.
Yeah. So we've talked about that inside of rental property mastery. You and I have had this conversation and others too about just professionalizing your rental property business. And I think we
Right.
all do that. You just got to jump in there and learn how things go and learn what the like don't do that part, but eventually you then say, all right, I need to build some systems and some processes and turn this into a real business, which is what you did. And so you've fast forward. I know I want to fast forward from that first deal because you've made a big leap where you live in Jersey, but you invested in three properties in Ohio. And so one in Cleveland and two in Columbus. So I want to kind of take a higher level view of the location. Like you liked South Jersey because it's close to you. You live there. You could self manage it. Why make the move to another state? Because that's a pretty big decision you made.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I think there's two reasons. The first was that after we had kind of purchased our investment property in South Jersey, I was essentially out of money. And I needed really to kind of start saving up again to do it again and have enough cash set aside for another down payment. So fast forward to 2022, when we had done all the right things, we'd put a bunch of money away and we were ready to do it again. And a year later, everything had changed. Values had gone up, interest rates are different. So quickly realized, okay, we aren't able to do this again in our backyard. We need to start looking at other options. And that was the first kind of catalyst in my mind that led me to start looking at other markets. And I really got the comfort of leaving my backyard. I can say, leaning on my experience through my W-2 job, my career I've spent working with kind of global companies, big companies, and I'm comfortable managing afar. I'm comfortable, having conversations and building relationships with people that I may never meet in person, because they live in another part of the country or they live in a different country. So having those two things really were kind of gave me the set the foundation of, okay, let's look at another market, and if we can do this. We could do this in another state, and everything will be okay.
Yeah, you had that validation that it has worked for other investors to do it long distance, and so you can do that. You can read the spreadsheets, you can build a team, and but you had the whole country to look at. Like, you're look that's just one of the things when I'm talking to people, they're like, I can invest anywhere in this entire country,
Right.
and there's so many cities, there's so many places. Like, how did you decide in the particular markets that you picked in the end?
So I first landed on Cleveland. I was doing a lot of research on just overall affordability, and then I was also looking at the time, it's 2022. I haven't looked recently, but just kind of looking at like rent to price ratios and looking at where it could still kind of potentially get you close to the 1% rule. All of these things that I was now starting to learn and understand that um, that play a role when you're analyzing properties. And another thing I looked at was I wanted a state that had, I knew that New Jersey, like the tenant landlord laws were a little tougher. I know it's different state to state, and I wanted to look for a state where they weren't as tough as where we currently are. Not that I had an issue or not that anything was bad, but I that was kind of the third thing on the list was if we're going to invest somewhere and not actually be able to be there, let's make it so that if an issue does come up, we're able to kind of quickly accelerate through that process and not really have much of an issue.
Yeah, and so for people to understand specifically, what I'm understanding you saying is, there's some states where if you have somebody not paying you, so the tenant doesn't pay you, it could take months to get the property back. Even if they did everything wrong as a tenant, you could still take months, whereas other states might have a more reasonable as from a landlord's perspective, where, hey, they don't pay, you have to give them notice, you have to give them a chance. We always wanna work with people anyway,
Right.
but if they're just ignoring you and not paying, that you could go through a legal process that's not like months and months and months. It might be more like a month or 2 to get your
Exactly.
property back, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Got it. So you started there looking at landlord tenant laws, looking at again, your budgeting. You say, here's the amount of cash I can save if I'm gonna put a 20-30% down payment. These are the types of markets I need to be in the price. Did you have a price range in mind, like 150 grand, 200 grand that you were thinking about?
By the time we were doing it in Ohio, it was a little bit less because we had, and this is at the time when I didn't. All I knew was kind of a vanilla way of purchasing a property, going with 25% down conventional. And at the time, I had said, 150 grand is the most that we could do with that, working backward again from that down payment. And properties in Cleveland, depending on where you are in the city, they could range anywhere from 100 to 200. So it really kind of was, we were in the sweet spot in that range. So it worked well.
Got it. And so you ended up purchasing a duplex. Is there anything you would say, just if other people are thinking about that first deal in a new market? Was there anything you learned about the team, about analyzing properties, the market that was insightful for you doing that?
What I would say, which, I spent a lot of time kind of analyzing the market, analyzing properties, and running the numbers. I spent the majority of my time doing that, and I thought that should have been where the bulk of my focus was. Looking back, I should have spent an equal amount of time vetting property management and vetting, the people that who are gonna essentially be your boots on the ground. Um,
Right.
we investors know that not no two property managers are alike. Some are great, some are not so great. And my experience with my first out of state property, it was a little bit of a struggle, and I think that it was because I lacked in the area of vetting property management. So that was tough.
Do you have any tips now that you've had different property managers and you have some that you like? Like, what are some signs, either on the negative side, like red flags that you would avoid, and what are some signs that like, oh, this is the right person that I really want to work with?
The biggest thing I think is just it's proactive versus reactive. I think that with the understanding that property managers, they don't just manage your property. A lot of them will have tens of hundreds, if not thousands. But to me, a good property manager will have just a much more proactive approach. Expenses happen. We all know that there are things that you're going to have to pay for, and but to be able to kind of have more of a partner, to kind of have someone that says, "Hey, I know we were there changing out the locks with a tenant turnover, but I took a look and saw that there's a little moisture in the basement. If you want to take a look at that, let me know. If not, if something happens, we'll stuff like that, rather than not hearing anything, and then at the end of the month you get your owner statement and you see X, Y, and Z. Oh wow, what am I paying for? I don't understand what all this is. And then it just becomes, then it's now you're having to go back and have a conversation about something that happened in the past. So it's more of a headache.
It's like proactive communication. It's like you wanna know about things ahead of time or in real time so that you're not
It's
surprised a
key.
month later.
That's key. Yeah, and I think it's just you can't have the expectation that a home, any house, is not going to have bumps and bruises and need to be patched up from time to time. It just is the reality of the business we're in, and I am much more. I do much better when those things are brought to me. It's not a problem. We'll
Mhm.
take care of it rather than being told about that it happened, 15, 20 days ago.
Yep. I think this communication thing's a big deal. Like I interviewed my property manager on the show about a month or 2 ago, and they do something that I think is a good question for anybody asking other property managers. They actually invest a lot of their resources into communications, into staffing to do communications. For example, they have some local people who are, local in South Carolina. They have like 2 full-time VAs, and they happen to be in the Philippines, whose job is just to communicate with tenants and owners about maintenance issues.
Oh
Right,
wow.
that to me was really impressive because I was like, "Okay, they're spending money on that function that you just talked about, being
Right.
proactive with communication," and they're excellent. Like, these people are super good at just like, for example, this week I had a refrigerator that died in a unit, and so here's the procedure. They sent me an email saying, "This unit, refrigerator's dead. This is over $500, which is our threshold, so we need to ask you for permission. I've already gotten 2 quotes. Here's 2 different refrigerators at Lowe's that you can choose from, A and B. If you just let us know, we'll take care of it." Bam.
That's great.
I was like, "Okay, that's exactly," it's not great that we had to spend money, but we expect that, right? We expect that we have to spend some money here and there, but the fact that they framed it, they were on top of it, they gave me some options, and it was like a 1 minute or a 30-second response for me, and that I move on with my life. That's what to me is a good communicator, good property manager.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I like the fact that they have it, it's segmented. I've worked with property managers I've worked with property management companies where they have, you know, 5, 6, 7 different property managers. So it's really kind of hard to understand or know,
Yeah.
who's going to help me when a situation arises. You're sending emails, you're trying to call, you're not getting a response, so then you move to the next person. I think that that's great hearing that it's you know exactly what the procedure is, you know who you're going to deal with. If there's a landscaping issue, there's someone you can call. If there's a plumbing issue, there's someone you can call. It's just everyone has a very specific role. I also think that's really really helpful.
It is, 100%. Yeah, so if people are calling managers, maybe just the takeaway on that is you could ask them for their systems or who's in charge of that, like to what Terrence is saying. Who's in charge if I have a problem? What's the procedure? To walk me through a problem. What if I have a heating and air that goes out? Like, how would you do that? What can I expect? And those are if they kind of hem and haw and they're like, well, we just sort of figure it out. Like wrong, wrong answer.
Right,
Like,
right.
here's our process, here's our system, here is one of these 2 people who will call you. If you haven't gotten a call within 24 hours, that's a problem. Like, that those are the kind you just wanna see they're organized and they have a system.
You do.
Property managers have to be the most organized, systematized people because they got a lot of things going on. If they don't come across to you as super organized, then that to me, that's a
It's a little
big
bit of a red
problem.
flag. Yep, I agree.
Yep, yep. Alright, so team is a big deal. You've emphasized that a lot. If you don't mind, like, let's dig into a couple of just the basic numbers on your Cleveland property, then also curious about your Columbus, Ohio properties and kinda how you evolved there, but would you mind unpacking the Cleveland deal just so people can know what that looked like?
Sure. Yeah. So the Cleveland property, again, we just went conventional. The purchase price was 129. Is a duplex. It was an up and down duplex, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom on the top, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom on the bottom. So we just put 25% down. The interest rate was 7.6%. When we bought it, the rent was about 1525 total. And now today, I just actually looked before we hopped on. It's 1640. So it's definitely gone up a little bit, and I haven't had a ton of capex work on that property. There's been kind of minimal maintenance. I know that a roof is coming soon, probably next year. Hopefully,
Mm.
hopefully I can get to next year. But yeah, I mean that property, I would say it probably cash flows, a couple hundred bucks a month. But again, the big thing for me on that property, because I have kind of bounced around a little bit with property managers, was just having someone, because it's in probably I would say probably a C plus neighborhood, just having someone on top of it, proactive and communicating.
Got it. Yeah, so that property correct me if you have a different way of thinking about it, but, like, with a C plus property, it's better a little bit better than the 1% rule. It's probably a little bit older. The goal of this property is to have enough cash flow to have a positive cash flow, You then hold it. You've got a fixed mortgage for the long term. So as
Correct.
those rents go up, you can either use that cash flow to save up to buy another property with a down payment, or maybe eventually one day you could pay that debt off and have just a cash flow centric property. But like the goal is cash flow in that property. It's not going to be like you're not going to set the world on fire with amazing, 5% growth rates, 6% growth rates. It's more just like steady, right?
That's right. Yep. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And that's a good segue into kind of our Columbus properties. So thus far, I have two duplexes, and then when I got to Columbus, those are single family homes. So one is a 3 bedroom, 1 bath. One is a 3 bedroom, 1.5 bath. As I've kind of evolved or adapted my investing career, which has not been that long, I've really kind of tried to keep in mind or tried to be strategic with almost like portfolio architecture. Um, our first property in South Jersey, it cash flows well. It's done well, and we're very happy about that. Cleveland, exactly like you just described, a little bit more cash flow, not in the most fantastic area, but it's chugging along pretty nicely. Now you go to Columbus, those two properties were bought with more of an appreciation, long-term appreciation in mind, rather than kind of the first two that were kind of a cash flow. So, I've started to kind of shift my thinking and look at total portfolio. Of course, you don't want to buy a property and not have it pay for itself. That's not the goal. But you know, if you have a property that cash flows a little bit more than another property, if you look at the total portfolio, if all of your tenants are able to pay all of your mortgages, I think that's kind of a win.
Got it. So in terms of numbers, like when you went to and when you went to Cleveland, you were thinking like, here's my budget, here's how much I have to put down, 25% down. Was it a similar approach to Columbus where you're like, what can I afford to buy in these markets?
It was, and my I had probably 50 grand for I had $100,000, and I knew that I had 50 grand essentially for each, because I knew that properties weren't going to, if I got one on the higher end, like a nicer area, more of like a B area, and it cost me, my down payment was more than 50 grand, then I would have been okay with one. But I had essentially told myself, hey, if I could buy property for 50 grand, do it twice, then I'll be in good shape. And so that's really kind of been my approach this whole time, that I've been kind of looking for properties, is to really kind of work backward from the down payment, and working back from the down payment if that works in an area that I want to invest in. Because the reality is, you could buy a property with not not a ton of money, but would it be a property in a location that you like? Would it fit any part of your buy box at all? So that was really kind of where I was coming from.
I like that approach. I feel like it's a simple way to like kind of filter out some of the markets that you're looking at. Because for you, you're like, all right, I want to spend about 50 grand down, and in Cleveland it was a little bit less than that. But then you work it backwards and say, all right, for to make that a 20% down payment, that's about a 200 to $250,000 property. And so
Exactly.
that like that's a constraint. But then you can say, out of all the markets I'm looking at, what's the best market I can buy? Like a market that has long-term potential. I don't want to buy a market that's going downhill, but I want to buy a property where I can buy a property for 200,000 that still has potential to grow, because your long-term goal is to stack up maybe one property every year, maybe two
Mhm.
properties, and then you have this portfolio of properties that are, paying themselves down. They're growing in cash flow. Some are growing more than others, but like the portfolio as a whole, as you said, then can work together. But until you buy the property, you don't get to have those benefits of the growth and all that. So you had to start somewhere, and starting with your down payment budget is a really smart way to think about it.
Yep. Yeah. No, you nailed it. Yeah, that's exactly right.
So let's talk about Columbus. You said it's a little bit more of a growth centric market.
Mhm.
But tell me how you evaluate that. Like what kind of data tells you that this type of market is more of a growth centric market versus not?
The big thing I like to look at, or that I saw, was job growth. A lot of large tech companies are moving to that area. A lot of, and not just large companies. The companies that are moving there, they're putting a lot of money into the area. They're kind of building hubs, whether it's has to do with data centers or um, chip plants, or the investments that these companies are making are very, very large, and those large investments will require a significant amount of employees. So
Right.
that's really kind of the big thing that the number one thing that I looked at was kind of what are the reasons why what are the reasons why people would move here, and it's for good, stable, long term jobs. And really, the other thing was, I really I like the university, large university. Ohio State is in Columbus, so that gives kind of the
The Ohio State, right?
yeah,
You have to have
yeah, exactly, the Ohio State University, which is funny. It's a reason to go to a game now. But
exactly.
and they have a strong healthcare system. So it's a really kind of a mix of all these different things of school and tech companies and healthcare, um, all of these things that obviously as the world evolves and changes and things like COVID happen, what will still be standing or still or will be resilient to kind of the things that are happening in the world, and those to me are kind of some big ones.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. I use a metaphor that you've probably heard me talk about where I compare it to like a solar system. Like when you're investing in a market, you look for like an economic sun that's
Hmm.
burning really brightly. And everything you just described to me is like a way of saying, the job growth, the types of jobs, the forward-looking jobs, not just jobs that are jobs that'll survive, changes in technology and AI and all that. Like those are it's that qualitative part of evaluating a market in addition to the quantitative. Like you have to look at the numbers too, but there's just a story, like, we're human beings, and there's a story, there's a vibe that goes on, and so you look for these economic suns where good things are happening, there's a lot of economic energy,
Hmm.
and then you look for, like, the little satellite cities or neighborhoods that are around that economic sun, because then your tenants have a job, they can live in those areas, and so I'm curious for you, like, Columbus is a pretty big metro area, like, how did you choose the places where you did invest, and then what did the numbers look like in the actual purchases there?
Yeah, yeah. So Columbus is very has its pockets, but there's a lot happening all over. There's a lot of development in all sorts of different parts of Columbus, and exactly like you said, kind of the economic sun for Columbus and for a lot of cities. It starts with kind of downtown. So really, that was I kind of looked at downtown and kind of went from there, and kind of some of the areas that I was looking were right in that kind of path of progress, and you could see kind of other homes being either flipped or renovated in that area. You could kind of tell that area was next. And obviously that this is it's not as easy sometimes in certain markets to find those. So a lot of credit to kind of my agent and even the lender that I used as a resource to kind of help walk me through all of these different areas and different things because they're there and they live it.
Yeah, they're on the ground. A lot of it is the vibe. It's like, all right, this is where people are wanting to move right now, or this is the best place, but then they're spilling over to this place. Like that, a good real estate agent. I'm glad you've mentioned that again. Like having a good agent on the ground when you're long distance is the the thing to help you
It
figure out these
is.
kinds of questions, right?
It is. Yeah, 100%. 100%. And having a good agent who's willing to tell you no and tell you, I can send you Zillow listings. I can send you areas all day, but I don't need you to say, hey, yeah, let's go, let's do it, let's look at it. I need you to say, no, this is not a good area, and this is the reason why you shouldn't look here. I think that's key when you have someone kind of not afraid to push back on you, even though you're the client.
Yeah, no, that's good. So you give him or her your buy box, and then they take that buy box and say, here's the locations that'll fit that criteria. And for you, it was again, here's my budget. I want to put 20% down. What were the actual prices that you paid for the Columbus properties? And I'm also curious what the rents look like because I'm curious what the numbers look like in a more growth centric market than the numbers we looked at in Cleveland, for example.
So the first property we paid 195 for, and then the second property we paid 209. So exactly like you said, kind of right in that range, right in that $200,000 range. And the first one is rented for 1650, and the second one is rented for 1700. And kind of an interesting story about both of these is just to kind of go back to the importance of having like a good agent and having a good team on the ground. Is both of these properties were not smooth at all to close. And That has nothing to do with my proximity to them. It had everything to do with um, just they were just difficult closes, and I definitely would not have been able to get through them, get them, get them closed, get them rented without the team on the ground. Thus far, up until this point, the property we have in Jersey, Cleveland, was really kind of a piece of cake, and it gave me kind of a false. Gave me kind of like a false, like, oh wow, like I see why people do this all the time. It's very easy. But that's just not the reality at all.
Got it. So you had some hiccups on the closing, the lending, just getting appraisals, kind of due diligence kind of stuff. But in both cases, do you have the agent? Were they also your property manager, or did you have another team that's helping you do like the getting it rented afterwards?
So in both cases, one of the big things for me and an agent was, do you work with investors and do you have investment properties yourself? Even just one, just having the experience of owning. And the answer was yes. So, with the answer being yes to both of those questions, I took a referral. I took a property management referral pretty seriously, because if I know someone lives in the market that I'm investing in and they have a property manager managing their properties in that market, then to me that says that that property manager is pretty good, because one, they could either manage it themselves because they're there, or they just wouldn't recommend it. They would just kind of tell me the avenue to find one. So that was kind of
Yeah,
how I got how linked up with my current property manager.
got it. Okay, good. All right, so take a deep breath. Here you are in like middle, that was March 2025 when you bought the second of those Columbus properties. So like
Correct.
if we look at your whole story, end of 2021, basically beginning of 2022, all the way to midway through 2025, like a year and a half or so, or 3.5 years or so, you've got these, 6 units, 4 properties, you got teams on the ground, you're in a few different cities. Talk to me about where your head is right now. Like you've been out looking at more properties. You're sort of on this rhythm of maybe every 6 months to a year, I'm buying a new property, I'm saving money. How are you thinking about your strategy that you've been doing for the last 3.5 years today in 2025, given where interest rates are, where the market is? Like, what's your plan now as you're working on?
Yeah. So my plan now is I'm really still kind of hungry for affordability. I'm really kind of I still have that small and mighty mindset, and I think that really kind of where my head is. If I think 5 years, 7 years, 10 years down the road, the pace that I'm on, it does feel pretty good. It does feel sustainable, and I would like to get kind of to a place where one a year, two a year, maybe no more than that, and then just kind of start paying down mortgages, and 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now have the portfolio that could potentially be a little bit more spread out. I am looking in, or I am currently under contract in the new market, separate from Ohio and New Jersey. So we can talk about that a little bit. But just having the flexibility, just having the equity flexibility, really that's if I look at my portfolio now, and I have thought a lot about, do I continue to kind of go on this path of like the starter phase or the builder phase that I'm in? And I know you talk a lot about this in RPM. Kind of when does the starter builder phase transition to the kind of harvester ender phase? And it's different for everyone. So I have kind of been thinking about that a little bit. But for me, I think I really just want to have the equity freedom. So my goal is to kind of just continue to purchase slowly and strategically, and um, you know, continue to kind of pay down mortgages so that I can get to a place where I have equity faster than I would if I were to just kind of tick along normally.
Got it. Is part of that decision ma and I know we've had these conversations offline too, but is part of that decision making deciding how much longer you wanna keep buying properties versus when you wanna start saving those down payments and just using that to chunk some debt? Is that kind of the dilemma in your
Exactly.
head that you're thinking about?
It is exactly. I definitely have this small and mighty mindset. Now is small and mighty, is that 5 properties? Is that 10 properties? The answer, and you and I have had a conversation about this a few months ago. That answer kind of lies in, how much cash flow or how much
Mhm,
is needed, to support kind of like my FI number.
mhm.
But that really. that really does. It's been coming up in my mind a little bit more and more. So I think I've started to maybe get to that transition where, after between 6 and 10, I'll really start to properties, 6 and 10 properties. I really start to think about um, slowly shifting.
Yeah, it's a good thing to think about because partly, and this is my feedback to you when we talked was partly it's a math thing, and it's like I need to get to a certain amount of net worth. I need to have a certain amount of properties that produce a certain amount of income so that when I pay them off, they pay my bills and my
Right.
FI number. That's part of it. But then there's another part that's really like personal and emotional too. It's like what do I feel like? Like, do I want to keep going? Do I want to take a break? Like, I know I'll just give my example. Like, I had a couple times when I was like, I need to take a break. Like, I need to just unplug from this grind that I'm working on. I want to take a mini retirement, or your kids are a certain age. Like, there's kind of life cycle type things that have to be overlaid with the real estate plan, and that's why it's so unique, and personal to each one of us. But I think what you've done well, which I admire, Terrence, is you've plugged away at a plan and like the builder phase is such a grind. Like it's just it can be I think some people get just I would say bored with it or
Mm.
they just get they're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, it's just another 2 years of this thing, just buying another property and doing this and saving 50,000 bucks and do it can be a little monotonous and there's people doing exciting, sexy stuff, flipping houses and burst
Right. Yeah.
strategy and here I am putting 25% down, but like you're doing exactly like to me, like most people who work a W-2 job and they have the ability to save some money, like you can improve the types of properties you buy. You can always do a little bit better, but like your basic plan is 100% right on. Like, I think that's the idea. Just be one rental at a time. Just keep going.
Yeah, exactly. No, yeah, I appreciate that. You're 100% right, and it is funny just listening to you speak right there. What I enjoy the most is actually the everything that goes into kind of learning about a new market and the communication and conversations you have and meeting people, lenders, agents, all of that. And I do also think of when you get to kind of the harvester ender phase and you're starting to kind of optimize your portfolio, that all of that kind of goes away, and it does make me think like, oh wow, it's like someone who really enjoys their job probably has a hard time retiring because they just love what they do.
Mhm.
I love
Yep.
the part of researching, learning, getting educated, figuring out what works, what doesn't work, and just talking to people about it. I think that's the best part for me.
Yeah, you're hooked. You're not gonna get out of this business, I can
Yeah,
tell for long
yeah, right.
the cool thing is, though, you can plow back some money. You can I call it like a little, like a part of your portfolio, a fortress part of your portfolio or an income floor is another term I use, where you can carve out a little piece of your portfolio that produces the cash flow that you need, and you can keep growing. Like, I'm still building properties, buying properties. I
Yeah,
do have fun with it, and as long as you're still having fun, this is something you can do the rest of your life. Like that's what's really cool about it. I wanna kinda go back to your final deal. You teased that you had a deal under contract and was in a different market, and I think from what you've told me, you actually made a connection inside of rental property mastery with somebody in Indiana who kinda tipped you off on a certain market. So maybe
yeah.
tell me how that process went, and then what's next with that
Yeah,
deal?
yeah, exactly, exactly. Making fantastic connections in RPM, and this was one that I'd connected with someone in RPM, and they currently invest in Indiana, and my intention really wasn't my intention at first. It just was a good person to connect with, and we talked and we clicked, and started talking, and I kind of told him, I've been looking in Columbus still. Prices are going up a little bit. It, maybe isn't working exactly where it was when I went and got under contract this time last year for like my first deal. So, I was looking for maybe a little bit more cash flow markets, stable markets, and it's again back to I love the opportunity to kind of explore a new market. He connected me with an agent that he works with, a lender that he has worked with before, and it's just been fantastic being able to kind of start over. And I think the best part about that, or any advice that I would say is, when you do that, it's definitely best to just be kind of just be open, just be open. And I talk to a lot of agents, I talk to a lot of different people, and they say, one thing it makes it tough when working with investors is that, what works in New Jersey doesn't work in Cleveland. What works in Clemson, where you are, doesn't work in Columbus. So, be willing if you're going to go to a new market, just be kind of willing to learn, understand, and educate yourself on what does work there. Um, and I think that'll open up just a ton of doors.
That's smart. Yeah, you gotta adapt the overall strategy to the specifics of the market and the rent to price ratios and how that works. That's really good advice.
Exactly.
So this deal, do you mind talking about any numbers on that one? Do you have what are you anticipating on this one?
So this deal is pretty interesting. So it was listed on the market for 135. It was a duplex, and it had been on the market for a long time, 150 days, long time, just been sitting there. And through conversations with the agent, he had said, "Hey, I'm really good friends with the property manager on this property." He had brought it to me, um, and the property manager has been managing this property for quite some time, and he knows the owner. If you're open to it, let's have a conversation. He would like to have a conversation because the owner is looking to really try to sell it at this point, and he thinks he can get them down on price. And I said, yeah, that's great. Like let's have a conversation. And long story short, what had happened was one half of the duplex was renovated, but the other half was not, and the seller had listed it as if both sides had been renovated. Essentially, that was kind of its top max value. Which is why it hadn't budged off of the market. So kudos to the property manager was really kind of able to walk the owner through this and explain if you need to sell it, if this is a position you're in, this is the price that you could sell it for as is. And I'm currently under contract for it right now for 85,000.
Awesome. So how much do you anticipate putting into the property to get it fully rent ready?
Yeah, so it actually currently has tenants, and the total rent that it's getting is 1,400. Now the beauty is that the side that is renovated has a tenant. She's been in there about a year. Happy, likes the place. The side that is not renovated is an older gentleman, and he's a long time tenant. He's been there for 10 plus years. He's been there before the property manager managed the property. So, and he's open about the fact that this is his home, and he's going to stay here until maybe he needs to go to like a senior living or something like that. So it really was a big win because there's already long-term tenants in it. The rents are in a good spot, and the side that does need work, I don't anticipate doing until the older gentleman moves out, which could be
Got it.
next year. It could be 5 years from now. So it works today, and it'll work even better once I'm able to fix up the other side.
Okay, that makes sense. So I was thinking maybe it was vacant, but so basically it needs to be remodeled to like a modern state to get higher rents. But you have an older tenant who's been there a long time that has lower rents, but because you're able to buy it at a lower price, it still makes sense. You can
Exactly.
still make the numbers work. Do you what are the actual rent numbers on those two units just to kind of show the difference between a remodeled unit and a not remodeled unit?
So the non-renovated unit, I believe, is 625, and the renovated unit is 775.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that works. And so you found a new market, you found a new team member, you've kinda got back into your cash flow mode. How would you compare this Evansville market to the other markets you're in? So comparing it to Cleveland, compared to Columbus, compared to where you are in Jersey, how would you place that in terms of long-term prospects, growth versus cash flow? How do you look at it?
I would probably compare it a little bit closer to Cleveland. It's definitely has good stability. Definitely not one of these. Columbus is experiencing a lot of growth right now. Where that will go, time will tell. But I don't know. I wouldn't describe Columbus as kind of steady and stable. It's ticking up a little bit more, which is good, which is great. I'm excited about. But I would say that this market is definitely a more stable, steady, um, and more comparable to Cleveland. More cash flow heavy.
Well, I just wanna say congrats, Terrence. I'm proud of what you're doing, and
Thank you.
your mindset and your planning and just persistence with this is really impressive. So congrats, first of all. And I wanna ask you, for those who are on the same path, like maybe
Mhm.
somebody is like back where you were in Jersey doing that first deal, or maybe they've done 2 deals and they're trying to continue that. What kind of feedback or advice would you give that you've learned along the way for somebody who is trying to build a portfolio like you're building right now?
I would say there's two things. I think the two biggest things are the first is I would say, there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of, we'll call them like TikTok investors. don't worry about all that. What will resonate with people is if you are your authentic self. People will be attracted and drawn to your authentic self. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to be someone who doesn't know anything. I have conversations all the time where I say, I have no idea what you're talking about or what's going on. That's good. People will resonate with that. And it's much better to be that person than to be, you know, trying to be something that you're not, especially
Yeah,
based off
know it
of
all. Yeah,
know it
trying to
all
press
or
yeah, exactly.
yeah, exactly. So that's the first thing that I would say is definitely key and important. And I would say that I haven't gotten to where I am without without doing that. And I don't think that some of the things that have happened would have happened if I wasn't transparent, honest, and just straight up. And so that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is, which is funny, it's very interesting. I think about it all the time. So as a real estate investor, yes, there are short term ways to invest in real estate, but by and large, most real estate investors can agree that you have a long term mindset. You're strategically trying to think and plan into the future, and that is really kind of the opposite of something. I have a bracelet on and it says, you probably can't read it, but it says be present. One of the big things that you need to do is you have to remember to be present. And I know that they're contradicting. It's contradicting to say you can't invest in real estate thinking about what it's going to do today. You need to think about what it's going to do 5 years, 10 years down the road. But I think it's critically important to remember that you have to be present. You have to be present for yourself, your spouse, your friends, your kids, and because if you're constantly thinking long term, if you're constantly and you talk a lot about this in RPM and understanding what's important to you and doing what matters and making sure that you're enjoying the journey because it will go by quick. And if you get to the end of it and you look around and it's just you, then it's almost like what was the journey for?
Beautiful. Yeah, I think all of us who are listening to this episode or investing in real estate, we're naturally forward-thinking people. Like
Right.
we're gonna try, but the be present that strikes home with me big time, and trying to strike that balance. We got to think of the future as if you're gonna live forever, but then be present. Like this is your last day. You gotta live it up, right?
You gotta live it up. Exactly.
Man, I like it. I like it a lot. Well, Terrence, if people want to connect with you, they're gonna want to stay in touch with you. I know you got a little bit of a social media presence going on now. You have an Instagram channel. If you want to let people know where they can follow you, I'll put links to anything you say in the show notes and the podcast and YouTube description below.
Yeah, yeah, no, I appreciate it. I really do. Yeah, trying to get my social media footprint up a little bit, but I do have an Instagram. It's K and K Properties, and you could also follow me on LinkedIn just under Terrence Knight.
Awesome. All right, I'll put links to those as well. Terrence, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for sharing, being transparent, and best of luck with your new deal you got going on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Coach. I appreciate it. This is great.
In this episode, Terrence grew to 7 rentals in 4 years by saving money for down payments. But what if you don't have any money for a down payment? Can you still buy a good deal? In the next episode, I talk with John Schaub about how to structure win-win partnerships that allow you to buy properties with other people's money. He's been investing for over 50 years, and his approach has helped countless investors buy properties without any of their own money. If you're watching on YouTube, you can click on the thumbnail above me here, or if you're listening to the podcast or watching on YouTube, you can also click on the link in the podcast or YouTube description below. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next episode.